Discussing the sickness of health with eminent cardiac surgeon Dr. Kunal Sarkar and our distinguished panel of young doctors, we have covered a wide range of issues ranging from our healthcare policy, do we have one, where does it come from, what's the glimmer of hope in the future, an excellent comparative analysis with different countries in the world, and as we were discussing the role of the corporate hospital and the financial pressures on patients today, it's also important to discuss the silver lining of corporate hospitals, the amount of specialization that India is able to provide to its patients when perhaps it wasn't expected to do so. On the other spectrum, we have the young doctors, their career pressures, and some intrinsic conflicts of being women in medicine. Stay tuned for the discussion in part 2. Coming back to where we left off, the corporate hospital and the financial pressures, is it about the size of your wallet? And does that depend on the kind of service that you get? So Shaba, what are your views on the silver lining in corporate hospitals?
The corporate hospitals that came about, from the nursing home to the structured corporate hospitals with big names that we see, which have been mentioned in the books as well, like an Apollo or a Fortis, and the single city ones or single state ones like Medica and Medanta and everything. But also, like, what really surprises me is we are still very low on the HDI index. We are not really above a Bangladesh or a Pakistan. And yet, if you work in a corporate private sector, you see so many people from there coming to us. How did we come to a point where we are giving specialized care, whereas in the history of our country, we are still considered a young country, we shouldn't be able to do that?
I think that's a question that really beguiled me for a while. Because look, no disrespect to our sort of brethren in the technical software facilities, but look, today we have to go begging around the world to buy a jet aircraft, right? And jet technology is more than a century old. Even if you consider Frank Whittle, there were people working before that. In an era when you have a sort of IITs and their clones coming up at every traffic light, right? So even in that era, we go begging around the world to buy jet aircraft. We still don't manufacture a passenger aircraft. Every little bits and bobs you and I use in medicine today, where are they manufactured? Very little is Indian manufactured. How many anesthesia machines are manufactured in India? So by that account, how come we, with very modest lower middle grade achievement in human development index, education, etc., how come today we are performing heart operations, joint replacements, brain surgeries, one of the leading countries in the world in transplant medicine, etc.? We should have been, by our deserved social ranking, a very modest, humble lower middle class. Why are we any better than Bangladesh or Pakistan today? We shouldn't have been, because we are really no better as far as public health is concerned. We are perhaps taking step backwards in per capita GDP. You see, this sort of anachronism in my mind is explained because something very strange happens in the late 70s, where through the 60s and 70s, what happened was, there was a lot of, in those days, people who were aspirational in their areas of specialty, the young doctors of that era started aspiring to get specialty expertise. And you didn't have that many embargoes and exams, there were many exchange programs. So a flock of enthusiasts went abroad, got their necessary technological trainings, and a certain percentage, I think that's a small percentage, but a certain percentage did actually come back. And if from whatever little research I've done into it, I would pick the year 1975 to be really a kind of sort of path-breaking year in Indian medicine, because that is the year when the first coronary bypass gets done in India. If you went to that institute today, you would perhaps wouldn't even think anything of it. A very humble place, Railway Hospital, Perambur, in the outskirts of Chennai. And Dr. K.M. Cherian, he came back. In his passport was stamped the residencies of 3 countries: UK, USA, Australia, New Zealand. Accomplished man. But somewhere, to do something great, you have to be rational. And this man, with that kind of a academic career, surgical training, he could have settled in any of these 3 countries he wanted to, comes back to India to a very, very, half-baked facility and does something which gives a lot of hope to people around him. And these people, there was Dr. I tend to babble around the heart a bit more since I'm a plumber, I'm a cardiac plumber by training. I look up to these people. There were the likes of K.M. Cherian, Dr. M.R. Girinath in Apollo, then Dr. Stanley John in CMC Vellore. So all these people, they did 2 very important things. They were clever, they were well apprenticed, they were very good at what they were trained to do, and more importantly, they went on training young people to keep up and spread this expertise. And it was sometimes you see opportunism is good. So when the private sector smelled this opportunity, that you had a desire, a demand for healthcare, you had some expertise available, they could, it's like talent hunting. They went hunting that, look, I can find a certain person doing reasonably good heart work, some clever chap is doing orthopedic work, some good guy doing, complex pelvic surgery, gynecological work. So that gave people, say, like Pratap Reddy, a lot of hope. And 83, see, 75 is the first bypass in India, and 1983 is another important watershed line where, look, Apollo was not charity. They were not a kind of appendage of any other function, but first time, healthcare makes a bold statement that we are a standalone healthcare corporate organization, and they pick up the right people from the right places, and they continue that tradition. Maybe expensive, yes. It wasn't easy to access for people, but good work, good outcome, good training. And this spread, this perchlorated in different areas of the country. There were similar institutions in the West. Bengal was last to catch up. I think in terms of the East and the rest of the country, we are probably separated by a decade and a half. That is the evolutionary difference between the areas. But you're absolutely right, that how come today, we have suddenly, it's like precocious development in healthcare, which is almost out of keeping. You don't even manufacture 80% of what gets into the cell phones. So a country who doesn't even manufacture the plastic of which the body is made out of a cell phone is performing 5, 6, 7,000 transplant surgeries per year. So these 2 things definitely are out of proportion. But mind you, we may have made a bit of an observation, but you have to keep it up. So there we have a head start. We've done well.
There's definitely a silver lining
in
these structures.
Without
and
a doubt, Mayuri, without a doubt,
Yeah.
Without a doubt. You take education, for example. We have a lot of educational institutions. How many educational institutions figure within the first 500 or 1,000 list? So we, by our standards, should not have been a medical tourism center. Till the 60s and 70s, you had a constant procession of the high and mighty, the rich and the super rich going out to Harley streets and Singapore's and all that. What happens in Bangladesh and Pakistan right now? It was taken for granted. And today the Middle East flocks to India for treatment. Today Delhi is draining the whole of Central Asia. Today Bengal caters to a big community from Bangladesh. Bengal unknowingly, you see. We do take the mickey out of us, but unknowingly we are the pioneers of medical tourism ever since the creation of Bangladesh in 1971, right?
So do you think something...
We are the unintended pioneers. You know, we are not given credit for it. So we did it.
So do you think, like, one point that I'm curious about, so previously due to the regional peculiarities of the South and the West, do you think the focus is really shifting to the East now because we are catering more to the Bangladesh?
No, not yet. You see, because I wish it was true, but we don't have enough meat in the sandwich yet. We probably have managed to get 2 pieces of bread, which we didn't have before, but I think we are going there because you see, at the end of the day, Boyjik, one very sort of brass tacks truth of life is everything follows the economic activity this day and age, isn't it? Whether you are in music, you are in education, in pure science, pure arts. So there has to be a lot of meat there has to be a lot of turnover in our overall economic scenario before we can claim. Because you see, roughly, I made a rough observation that if you consider a private investment in healthcare in the East, it's only once in a decade in our part of the world, you have a singular private sector investment which is visible. That is far too less. And then again, as we discussed before, people are a little bit uncertain that whether you sink your money in this sector or not. We are getting there, but our economy, it's exactly what separates India from China today. It is not those barren Himalayan foothills of Sikkim or Ladakh that separates India and China. What separates India and China today, we were 2 cousins side by side. At one point of time, both were earning 1,000 rupees a month, and then suddenly you look at one another 10 years later. So the chap on the northern side who was earning 1,000 rupees is now earning 1 lakh, and today you are earning from 1,000, you are earning 5,000. So why China is making faces at us, and they are, because it's all interlinked with that system. So we hope we get there in Eastern India. But our gravy train is lacking in the gravy right now because our economic activity needs a lot more adrenaline being pumped into it.
From this discussion and the picture painted in the book, it kind of sounds like India has decided to build the road as it goes. They will place the brick when when they find the brick. But whatever, even if it's a dusty road, they will travel it. For now, it seems so. Now, for people on top, this might, bode differently. But for young doctors, I mean, the pressure to perform it's not the road less traveled, it's the road that's not there, perhaps, the journey that you're embarking on. So specifically, this young doctor conflict, this career conflict, or the stats about how our undergraduate admission for women are, dwindling as specialization progresses. So what would you have to say about that?
Oh yeah, thank you for raising this point, Moiri. There are 2 aspects to this. Firstly, it's like a bottleneck effect. Everyone's following a rat race, and the journey begins right from from any kid whose teenage gets snatched away. He has to go every weekend, he has to attend coaching classes, myriads of MCQ books in the first phase, and then you need to score in an undergraduate examination, entrance examination like NEET, where the cutoff is more than 75% in order to get a meritorious medical seat. That's just the beginning. You complete 5.5 years training, and then you see in one of the chapters is mentioned that the MBBS is devalued. You again sit for another MCQ examination, mark books and rote knowledges, and then you again clear an examination in order to become a specialist. Let me ask you a question, Moiri. So today you have a major stomach ache. You are having some difficulties for the last 3 months, let's say. Whom would you first go to?
I would go to the doctor who is...
The medicine shop.
So this raises the main point. There's a conflict between the...
Yeah, actually, Boyjik, I think exactly, because in these past few years, when I've being not so young myself anymore, when we were going through people who were training and passing through our system, I'll just make quite a few brief points which I've tried to highlight in different chapters. One thing definitely for sure is that medicine has a lot of perceptional glamour attached to it, has it not? Yeah. So getting into medicine, you're supposed to be almost working through. This was your certificate to some kind of opulence in life, some halo, prestige, and the rest of it. Fair enough, let it remain. It's a little bit, probably a little bit like Bollywood. So you and I don't want to rub off all the silver dust. Now, whether it is more silver or less dust, or more dust and less silver, it remains to be seen. But few of the things which I think is extremely important, like right now for these young people, is that we are addressing, I think you alluded to this, that we have a disbalance between the number of doctors per the population. And year on year on year, we are increasing the number of doctors, which not so long ago was around 40,000. It's now hitting almost 70,000 per year, a combination of private colleges and government colleges. But the question is, where are these young people who are going out of the system? Where will he or she work? She's done her stint as an accomplished obstetrician, gynecologist, him in critical care, her in medicine or surgery. But today's Dr. Mayuri requires infrastructure to follow the doctors who are being trained out. Otherwise, it's like training to be a pilot. Why train a pilot if that guy has to ride a cycle at the end of the day? So all his or her aviational skills are a waste of time. And if you look at the India's trajectory of infrastructure, the best data, we are very generous with mythology, but very miserly with data. So what data I could fish out is very hard to see any real-time expansion over the last even good part of a decade. Today our total capacity stands at very generously around 20 lakh beds. About 7 lakhs in the government sector, 13 lakhs in the private sector. So if you have the same infrastructure and year on year you are producing 15% more doctors, today I don't think either a Shaba or a Boijik or a Roshni is happy. An unemployed doctor is called what? Private practice. An unemployed engineer is called what? In Bangla, bekar, out of work. Unemployed doctor tomorrow, if you have a public welfare scheme, will not be entitled to any unemployment benefits. A doctor is never unemployed. So today, after all the labor of life, if he is made to sit in some sort of cluttered chamber somewhere, he probably has to do it. He doesn't have a choice. But is that what he wanted to do? Is that what he trained for 5 years in undergraduate medicine and at least another 5 to 6 years or 7 years in postgraduate apprenticeship and theoretical training? Is that what it is for? No. So I think you produce doctors today as a proportion. It's a double variable. It's more of a quadratic equation rather than a x and a binomial today. You have to produce doctors keeping an eye on the infrastructure which is available, number one. Number 2 point, which is extremely important, is give these young people some stability and respectability in their lives. These 70,000 people, it's like life cycle of a butterfly. A butterfly will be very envious of the doctor, the length of time we take to mature from the pupal, larval to the butterfly stage. So after all those years, what is going to happen? Less than a quarter of them will have any stable, predictable, professional life of their own. I've used perhaps a very stark example, that even a home help in your house, if it doesn't work for a couple of days out of fever, you will pay them out of compassion. A doctor today, a doctor, we also have a lot of blame to take on us. The more senior you become, the more fee for service you become. And that is a malignant trend we are enforcing on the youngsters. So if for any reason she is sick, God bless her, and hasn't worked for a week, she's got nothing to take home. So it is the number disproportion, it is the lack of predictable employment that a doctor is looking for today. So these are very critical questions, and even the government has got absolutely squinted viewpoints. Once he hits the wards, after 5 years of training and internship or whatever, he's got to stand shoulder to shoulder with somebody who's trained 2 years or so as an Ayush doctor. So aren't we contradicting ourselves? Aren't we telling him and her that, look, your 5 years of labor was really not required? You better, it's what do they call in military term? It's called debriefing. So what do? You take her to a debriefing room and say, all your mugging for 5 years you forget, just remember 2 years of it and come to the ward.
So and then you walk across the bridge.
Sorry?
The bridge course. That's apparently what the term does. Yeah.
So there is a whole lot of contradiction. But my first point for current, right now, policy correction is, for God's sake, not long ago we used to produce 4 cardiologists a year. From the ridiculous, we've gone to the sublime. We are now producing about 80 per year. So now even if you had one cardiologist hanging from every ceiling fan in a cardiac unit in our city today, there would still be more to spare. And these people are forced to take on work that is really not commensurate with their training. And so it's a very squinted policy.
And 2 more points, Dr. Sarkar. One is first, the ratio, the demand-supply mismatch of the population and doctors. It's like 10,000 people are being catered by 2 doctors. So this deficiency mainly lies in the primary healthcare sector. It's not.
It's a distribution.
Yeah, the distribution is should be more focused on the primary healthcare, where the deficiency needs to be met. And secondly, we need to produce more quality on the training, like more qualified and the training needs to be more.
Look, it's a very unkind statement to make. I don't want to start a kind of unarmed rebellion right now. But sometimes you shouldn't hesitate to start one either. But the question is, today a good guy who's passed IAS and has become a district magistrate is actually sitting in the comfort of a district headquarters. But why will she, after having done some 7-8 years of training and postgraduate, be like Livingstone in the middle of Africa or David Attenborough in the middle of insects and serpents and snakes? She's not filming a nature documentary among snakes, insects, sitting in a half a sort of knee full of mud and in a clinic which doesn't even have electricity. Now you wanted her to do a wildlife documentary, that will be very good. But you want her to pursue a medical career in those very rustic, very underprovided setting. And again, in the context of the pandemic, it is that deficiency that has been pointed out. You call something, like Bihar. Bihar has been very honest. All the healthcare centers are turned into cow sheds now. So the health ministry is amalgamated with animal husbandry. So they are producing a lot of cow dung. They are looking at, they are producing a lot of milk, cow dung, etc. So they're actually utilizing that infrastructure pretty well. So what's the use? What is the use today of having a thin rickety bed, which was probably a gift from some Portuguese sailor, which is all rusted, a saline that was manufactured some 5 years back for a disease which requires a breathless patient getting oxygen? And what is, if Boijik was to be a doctor in certain healthcare center, the end of the interaction will be what? Patient will die, doctor will get beaten up. Now who's worrying at the end of the night? If he says that, look, there isn't an oxygen cylinder here, patient only has one remedy: beat up Boijik. Headlines, breaking news, lot of excitement, end of story. Doctor is left to cure his or own fractures, and the fractured system remains as it is.
Indeed, the sickness of health truly is bearing open the cracks in every.
It is far more stark, and this drama, very often, this theatre of the absurd gets played through our lives. you know.
And this is an important conversation to be had for people who do perceive the doctor's life as something glamorous, or they do feel that, you know, the doctor's position is alienated from theirs as a patient, but truly such is not the case when the fractured system is actually
If I may, you know,
opening up.
Monuri, I'll just ask, say, Sabha and Roshni one question. That if you've gone through what I thought about women in healthcare, how do you feel about that?
The more and more, the other day on a social media app, I interacted with a female orthopedic surgeon, and that is the first time I have seen a female orthopedic surgeon. And this
This is the first time you've seen one.
First time I have seen one, and I have done my internship. I have worked in one of the most eminent medical colleges. I am working in a government hospital, but this is the first time I have met someone, and I haven't met her, I just heard her voice. And I was so excited about it because it's so few and far between that, first of all, of course, the department I work in, there is a lot of women in it, but when I am referring a patient or I want a referral, mostly the doctors coming in are male. And that's the truth, that except for maybe a few preclinical subjects or non-clinical subjects and obstetrics and gynecology and maybe dermatology, most of the women do not make it into the post-graduation system, whereas we have almost a 50-50% ratio.
Yeah, I've actually raised this question in the book, you know, because, you know, all this, not just furore, great concern about this sex determination in India. One of the first people to have raised this international alarm, acting on various inputs, was actually Dr. Amartya Sen. And years back, I think BMJ carried a leading article by Dr. Sen, and I still remember the heading of the article, "Where have all the women gone?" Right. So I think, you know, do you think we ask the same question in medicine today? You're 52% of the undergraduate intake, but by the time it comes to
by the
clinical
time we are
medicine,
reaching the
I have raised the
post-graduation,
question,
yes.
and I don't think I provided the answer.
I just have one more question to.
No, I think women get preeminence.
I
So
just had the question, yes.
I think Roshni followed by Sabha should answer
Okay,
it.
fine.
Add
yes,
the
I just-
question.
Yes, I just get privilege.
Are you blaming him for that?
No, I'm not blaming. I'm letting him
No,
add the question.
So the question is pertinent, more so because today happens to be the 160th birth anniversary of Kadambini Ganguly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the 18th of July. As well as this last week we saw in the Royal College of Surgeons bulletin that woman cardiac surgeon, Dr. Kathy McDermott, who's 37-week pregnant for a third delivery, completed cardiac surgery. So my question
I
to
actually trained under Elaine Griffiths, who in the 90s was the only practicing cardiac surgeon women cardiac surgeon in England. Elaine was fantastic, you know, apart from looking like a Bond girl, she was absolutely fantastic, you know. She was stunning in her leather outfits. So, but a great surgeon, and I owe a lot of my initial training to Elaine. But coming back to the question.
So my question to Roshni and Shabba will be like, so why do you think this disparity exists? Some say like the woman needs to focus on family, they are like subjugated by the dominance of the patriarchal society. Lot of factors come into play. So what do you think?
I think there must be something more practical in it, you know. Where do you see the bottlenecks?
The bottleneck for me is, I feel, and this has started coming in maybe the other fields, right? There is no if you see in the US, there is no maternity leave.
You see, part of it is
Yeah.
a global phenomenon.
It's a global
Right.
phenomenon.
Part of
It's
it
not
is a
just
global
it's just
phenomenon.
not
I think
India.
it is
Yeah.
unfair to give it a very sort of, you know, say that it happens in India exclusively. That's not the fact.
So it's just the whole. It is the structure of the society. Obviously, I mean.
Can I just
and-
ask you, do you think medicine is a very primitive profession still, the way it is structured? It's like playing, you know, contact sports. It's like women don't play rugby, you know, in that way.
I
So
think
it's
the
too
general
primitive
perception
and
is
too
still-
physical a
yes.
profession.
Yes, I think the general perception, maybe we as female don't feel it. We want to go ahead, move ahead, but I think the general perception when we come in contact with the people or our general population, the mindset of the people is still that probably a male doctor would be preferred more if it's a surgical field, or if it's apart from obs and gynae, I think, where the Indian population will always prefer a female. But in
Yeah.
other sectors, whether it's a cardiac procedure or it's a neurological procedure, I think males are more dominating it's not that there's no availability of a female cardiac surgeon or a neurosurgeon. They are taking these super specialty courses nowadays, but people need to also come forward for the treatment. They used to also have to come to us.
You see, another point, I'll ask both of you on that, and my observation is, going back a century when I was in medical school, I came straight out of a very strict Jesuit upbringing. I've never seen 50 women together in any sport in my life. So out of 100 odd people who were there in my medical class, we had 50 women, and all our senior batches and all in medical college were deeply envious of us. What have you done? What have you done to deserve this? And but apart from the sort of mirth of it, on a median average, no gender statements, but the intellectual equity. They were far more assiduous, far more sort of regular, intelligent. So what hurts me in some way is also the loss of their intellectual equity.
I think also the family or the social support
Yeah.
that a female needs after a point. I think the perception was, okay, if you've gotten into a medical course, you're completing a 5.5 years of MBBS, it's a lot. Now you get married and you start your family, you've done your fair deal of education. But I think the trend is changing now. Now I think the
So are
family
you
support.
feeling the same pressures? You're on the threshold of
No, now I think it's changed
It's
for
changed, I
our
think.
family support and all.
you feel it has changed?
But I think one of my first teachers in school, she taught us biology, and the reason she's a doctor, but the reason she's teaching in a girls' school and she's teaching a subject is because her in-laws would not allow her to work. But I do see it changing now,
Yes.
of course. And also I feel like it's a little unfair, because if you look at super specialization, that would be akin to having like a CEO or a vice president in a corporate structure. How many CEOs of tech companies, how many CEO of banks
Very true,
are female? So I
Exactly.
don't think it's just a
Just
medicine
medical, yes.
thing related. You also see it in the PhD level, in particularly the sciences, that the number of women going for a PhD in sciences is far less than the undergraduate intake. So I think the comparison is of a society in general, and more than anything, more than just being like in our field. Whereas I think our field, we do interact with a lot of women professionally because of the nurses, who are the backbone of the medical community.
I think
Once
on the
again,
contrary-
I just want to bring in a little bit of a pandemic. That you see, we are living in times where Indian pandemic campaign is being spearheaded by a research organization. We don't know why, when we have a Center for Disease Control, which are sort of like the substitutes in the cricket field, waiting to bring in the water. But God bless them. But epidemiology and preventive health is one area where there are a lot of women contributing very substantially. Even if you go through the list of all the eminent epidemiologists who are seen, heard, read today, quite a few, I think majority would be women, and a good part of them would be from India, from Indian origins, educated in India. But then again, if I go through the honor roll call in the National Task Force for COVID, or the ICMR roll call of people maintaining it, even some committees set up by the state government. I don't know why we have this germane mistrust, because nowhere in there are like Dr. Gagandip Kang, etc., there are some very interesting voices heard, and they make some of the most incisive comments.
And I think that's one more reason.
But not trusted by the people who are making decisions.
It is at the top level, definitely, as you say, heads of
Yeah.
committees. But on primetime television for the past 1 year, the only doctors that news channels choose to interview when talking about COVID are all men.
Yeah.
Even on panels which talk about whether or not the pregnant woman should be given the vaccine, over there a female doctor is missing. So the spotlight on them, is not given to them on every level. And perhaps, as you say, the sickness of health, as you've labeled the book, that crawls into other spaces without us often realizing how deep the picture actually can go.
But I think time has come for you people to to sort of force the door open, hasn't it? What do you feel?
Yes.
I mean, as you said, you had a batch which was 50 women, but
Yeah.
but you see, your seniors before that were like, how do you have so many female women in the batch?
Oh my God!
And because of that, I do think that this particular of having so many undergraduate, of it being equal to the sexes has come.
Very
And maybe in another 10, 15 years, it will be
No,
equal in the
my advice
postgrad.
is never wait that long. Yeah. In India's experience, 5-year plans have not.
5 years plan
very
haven't
well.
worked out.
No, I think
You are youngsters in the digital era. You should plan for tomorrow. You know.
No, I think in one of the mindsets that we have, that is our young
Yeah.
group that we have, we don't see any discrimination between the other gender.
Right.
At least me, I don't see anything. But it's the societal mindset, the compulsion that is set in, that's still a driving force.
Boyjik, you know, to be fair to all of us, I still feel, say in my specialty, in India, in Kolkata, you know, probably there are 10 surgeons trained by me who are practicing in different hospitals of the city. They ought to. But at the same time, I can at least recall 2 or 3 very bright young women who wanted to have a career in this line. But somewhere, I think they found it very hard. Because, you know, it is still very, apprenticeship in medicine is still very gladiatorial. You've seen Spartacus. I've never seen any women gladiators out there, you know, right? So even in that era, you know, gladiators, so we still behave like very physical, cutthroat, blood and shed. So somewhere our processes will have to be more inclusive. We have to change our ways, because with the technology of training, with people, manpower, our pretense that this has to remain, you know, we take a lot of pride in our primitivity. You have to work for 26 hours a day, you know, apart from that. Some great surgeons I've worked with in England, the first question they used to ask a cardiac surgeon wanting a senior job is, how many days have you slept in the theatre? Not in the critical care. We used to sleep for days in the critical care. That's taken for granted. If you are incorrigibly dedicated, then you are supposed to be sleeping it out in the OTs itself. You know. So it was almost like this primitive, you know, medicine that, you know, a lot of hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo, the world can go to hell, I'm there, lying prostrate at the feet of some medieval god. I think that has to change, and you all should take up an agenda to, that is not necessarily, yes, a lot of it is patriarchy, but somewhere we are still in our minds, the gladiatorial Colosseum psychology still works, and we take a lot of pride from it, you know. You know, you haven't gone home in 3 days, fantastic. But have I actually done something very worthwhile by not going home for 3 days? Is a question. You know, if I'm stupid, I can still be stupid being in hospital for 3 days.
Exactly.
So that doesn't stop me from being stupid. So change it, you know, and for God's sake, don't wait for 10 years. 10 years is a long time.
Of course, as you said, some rebellions need to be started, and some of them, as doctors are eternal optimists, some need to be started soon. But this discussion on this lucid and objective documentary that is The Sickness of Health, and the conversation we've had today has been an eye-opener in terms of the role of healthcare, corporate hospitals, our colonial legacy and how we are here today, the road we are building. It has been an excellent discussion on the book The Sickness of Health by Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Thank you for joining us.